Saturn and Rahu combinations. Now this is always an interesting combination. I have a lot of experience with Saturn and Rahu combinations because Saturn and Rahu are together in my chart, so I've paid a lot of time and attention to this particular combination. Now, one of the things we have to be aware of with Rahu is that Rahu is showing you what you need to develop in this life. Rahu is showing you what you need to develop in this life. It shows where you've not put a lot of time and attention in past lifetimes. So it's not the easiest placement wherever Rahu is, generally speaking, because you don't have a lot of conscious awareness of that area. You're meant to put more time and attention to thinking about what house is Rahu in, what planet is Rahu influencing. And when it comes to Saturn, what does Saturn deal with? Saturn deals with focus. Saturn deals with discipline. Saturn deals with restriction. Saturn deals with suffering. Saturn deals with our capacity to do hard work. All these things are qualities that when Rahu gets with Saturn, the person might not necessarily have the easiest time with, particularly in childhood. But the better dignity Saturn, and the better dignity Rahu, the greater capacity the person will have to grow into these things more naturally, organically. I was recently having a conversation with one of our astrology apprenticeship track students, and she was talking about Rahu with Mars, which we've already done a video on that, so you can go back on this channel and find that. But she was saying she didn't feel she had any option but to develop that Mars. And I said, well, that's not going to be true for everybody. A lot of people with their Rahu, they will not want to do the work that Rahu requires, so they'll avoid it, which causes more and more problems. She says it was unavoidable for her. And for everyone, it's unavoidable. But most people, it's like, again, changing the oil in your car. Well, that's unavoidable. You have to do that. But some people are lazy and they just don't want to do it, or they don't take the time to do it, and their car eventually blows up. They'll have to get another car, and they'll have to figure that out one of these days. But the point is, with Rahu, there are things that you kind of don't necessarily want to do in the beginning, but you find that you have to. You have to develop it. So with Saturn and Rahu, what do you have to develop? You have to develop your capacity to work hard. You have to develop your capacity to bear suffering and sorrow. You have to develop your capacity to be disciplined. You have to develop the capacity to do the tedious work to make things successful. Like those little things you just hate doing, but you kind of have to do it, whether you're a musician, whether you're a business person, whether you're an artist. Any work that you do, there are going to be little things that you just hate, but you have to learn to do them. Saturn deals with suffering and pain and so on. Oftentimes when we get Rahu and Saturn together, the person has a difficult time bearing the burdens of life, the natural things of life. Death is common to every species, to everything. It's a cycle of regeneration. That's why Saturn is exalted in Libra, the house or the sign furthest away from Aries, which we know that the 7th house deals with things like death and loss because it's as far away from us as possible. So it gives this capacity to bear change and transformation. And usually when someone's young, they have an extremely hard time for that. It can be almost traumatic in a sense. But as they grow, things will occur in their life. They'll lose something very familiar to them, or they'll have something that they just can't overcome. And that's Saturn, in a sense, teaching them to bear the fact of life, that some things can't be controlled, that sometimes things go horribly wrong. And that's just part of this process of being alive in this human plane. Saturn Rahu people early on typically have a real hard time with structure and discipline. What they need is to develop a method, if they can, to set up their life in such a way that it is orderly. They do the same thing every day. They eat at the same time. They get up at the same time. They attend to their duties at the same time. And for a Saturn Rahu person, this seems boring. This seems like, you're just putting a person in a cage and saying, you can't be free. Which is the other aspect of this Saturn-Rahu combination, is that it can give kind of a hyper focus on extremes. And why would that be? Because Saturn itself is restriction, order, authority, and discipline. Rahu is can be chaotic. The nodes have this kind of feeling with them. Rahu wants to be free. Rahu wants to travel to foreign lands. Rahu doesn't want restrictions put upon his time. Rahu wants to obtain success in his own way. Rahu wants to do it in his own fashion, in his own unique fashion. And here we put Saturn, the conservative planet, with it. So the person has to learn to honor and acknowledge their wild side, in a sense, but they also have to honor and acknowledge the fact that they do need discipline in order to anchor that. So the fine line that a person has to tread with Saturn and Rahu is that between tradition and innovation. How can you honor tradition, but also be innovative? And if you get an afflicted Saturn or afflicted Rahu, and how do you determine if Rahu is working well by itself? Well, whatever planet Rahu is with, whoever is the lord of the sign Rahu is in, whatever the dignity of those are, shows you the dignity of Rahu. The better the dignity of Rahu, the more likely in time the person figures this out and works with it well. So how do you tread the line between tradition and innovation? Negatively, a person might go to one whole extreme, where they decide that tradition is the way it is. Usually that's more of a Saturn K2 thing, but it's possible because the nodes have an interchange of energy, and so they become even more rigid and dogmatic that their way is the only way. On the other side of that, it can go to another extreme where they totally forget about tradition, and they say tradition is nothing more than a prison, to keep us locked in the past. And those are the extremes that we have to watch for with Saturn and Rahu combinations, and we have to learn to walk that boundary, which is difficult. It's not easy, but hopefully your other planets can help you, remembering that you don't just have Saturn and Rahu in your chart. You've got all these other planets doing things as well. So there's more to it than just this. This is just if you have Saturn and Rahu combined, Saturn with Rahu in the same sign, Rahu in Capricorn or Aquarius, which is ruled over by Saturn. These are the things that you need to be aware of. Now, Saturn and Rahu can give a fascination for remote things, distant places, foreign lands, foreign cultures. It can give a person work dealing with foreign things. For example, I was raised in West Virginia, small town, 30,000 people. And somehow I became a Vedic astrologer, interested in sciences from the Far East, interested in foreign things like meditation. I have an interest in other cultures and other countries and other religions and all these sorts of things than what I was raised in. That's a Saturn-Rahu influence. Saturn deals with the capacity for authority, and Rahu can amplify that. So that's why when we get these combinations, it can drive a person to success, meaning they feel that's all they need to do is be successful, or it'll drive them to a position of being an authority where other people look to them for guidance and so on. And how a person works with this is really based on the other part of the chart, because this can be a very rough combination where the person feels like they have to be driven to success at all costs, but that's usually because in the back of their mind, Saturn is saying, you're not a good person, see all these problems that you have, remember how someone told you that you'd never amount to anything. And so Rahu gives this drive to success through overcompensation. So we have to watch for that with Rahu and Saturn. On the other hand, Saturn is disciplined approach, steady approach to developing a sense of greatness. And that's not greatness in the sense of look at me and how wonderful I am. It's just I do my job well, you can count on me, and so therefore I become great. So it's not an egocentric thing like the other way. It's more just you did what needed to be done to accomplish that. Rahu can put a hyper-focus on that, or it can show a person's in this life who is meant to do that, to say, I don't know exactly how to achieve this, but I know I have something to offer to the world. And so I'm going to work slowly and surely towards doing it, and hopefully it'll work out, because with all things, who knows? Saturn and Rahu can give a very cruel part to a person's nature. It can make a person ignore their feelings. They become too detached. It can make a person ruthless. It can make a person remorseless. It can make a person seem uncaring. And that's something that, comes up a lot when I meet people personally. They have this sense of me as though I'm detached, cruel, uncaring, whatever it might be. But that's only because, these two planets are very strong in my makeup. And so I'm not going to come across as the lovey, fun, emotionally, I want to make you happy at all costs kind of person. I'm going to have more of that detached approach with the Saturn-Rahu combination. But again, we have to remember that there are other planets in a person's chart. So if an individual has this, they may come across that way. But if you look at how the other planets are situated, you might find in other situations they're able to be free and emotional and expressive. People ask me in my videos, why don't you laugh more and smile more? Well, I take astrology seriously. I don't really care to get all funny and, emotional about it or try to wow you with entertaining you. Sometimes it's fun when I talk to friends of mine on this channel and we have a good laugh and so on. But I tell people, if you want to see me being more expressive, well, come listen to me play music. Or, let's go play a sport together. We'll have a lot of fun. But for me, the way Saturn and Rahu is situated in my chart, I take it very seriously. So you might find that Saturn and Rahu people, depending on where that Saturn and Rahu is placed, that house, they'll take very seriously. They won't necessarily want to goof around about it. They want to be very focused on it, very intent upon it. So, always remember that this whole idea is important, and that just like the sun helps a person make sacrifices for greatness, well, Saturn does the same thing. Remember, Saturn's the son of the sun. So, as I've been writing in one of my newest projects, that if someone has a strong sun or a strong Saturn, they may hurt their friends because maybe their friends invite them to a birthday party or their birthday parties. And this person wants to go to a prestigious university. And so they turn down all the invitations because they feel they need to study and focus on getting this prestigious university. They're not doing it to say, I want to hurt you, my friends, and say, I don't like you, I'm not coming to your party. They're saying, I'm making the sacrifice because my drive, my direction is to attend this prestigious university for whatever reason. So we have to remember that when it comes to cruel and malefic planets, when there's a sense of ruthlessness, uncaring, detachedness, being detachedness, that's not a word, but being detached or making sacrifices, it's not always because they are actually out there to be mean. It's because they see something that needs to be done or achieved, possibly for the greater good, and they're willing to do that. Now again, if Saturn and Rahu are afflicted, a person can be this way, not for the greater good, but for themselves. And that's where we have to be very cautious with the Saturn and Rahu combination. Now, as I mentioned, Saturn and Rahu shows a person needing to learn how to bear the pains of life, the natural pains of life. And because of this, it can make a person have a tendency towards depression or have difficulty managing their emotions. And the reason this is the case is because they have not learned to bear the facts of life, whatever those may be, that there are people starving in the world, that sometimes you don't get paid what you think you should be paid, and sometimes people leave you, all these kinds of things that are just normal to life. Another conversation I was having with one of the astrological apprenticeship students, we were talking about the whole curse of astrologers thing, which I mentioned in the Saturn K2 video. And she said, that's just common to astrologers. And I told her, I said, it's not that astrologers have more problems. I mean, sure, they may be more new agey and more flaky, and then they've got more problems just because they don't get their shit together. That's possible. But if you actually take stock of doctors, lawyers, engineers, garbage men, postal workers, astrologers, massage therapists, if you take the gamut of professions and you ask them about their lives, they're going to tell you how shit went wrong. In the span of their life, stuff has gone wrong for everybody. The problem with astrologers and people with, say, Saturn and Rahu combinations is they tend to focus a little too much on the problem and take it internalize a little bit more. So it's not that the doctor has less problems than the astrologer. It's just the doctor realizes that that's part of life. Whereas the astrologer is looking to perfect everything and live in such a way that pain never touches them, which is unrealistic. And that's often what Saturn and Rahu tries to do. But working with Saturn and Rahu, you can grow into the wisdom of this, and then you can deeply understand this and be more internally centered. So Saturn and Rahu, believe it or not, is a great combination to have if you're willing to do the hard work to understand Saturn. And I need to do a whole nother video on this, but everyone thinks of Jupiter as the planet of grace, right? Or Jupiter is the planet of happiness, true happiness. Maybe Venus too, but let's just say Jupiter for now. Well, that's kind of true, but it's actually not. Saturn is really the planet that's going to teach you true grace and true happiness. Because with Jupiter, things are given to you. Things just happen to work out. And that's not true grace and true happiness. True grace and true happiness comes from the capacity to understand that you can be internally poised and centered and clear whether things are going horribly wrong or whether things are going great. So, given the option, Saturn is a planet that's going to actually teach you true grace, true clarity, in my mind, versus Jupiter, which is only going to be good while he's there, right? Saturn allows you to be good if you work with him, whether grace is there or whether grace is not there in the way you perceive it. So keep this in mind. All right, so we'll move on.